Well, good evening from Tel Aviv, where it is a lovely, warm evening. And welcome on behalf of Harif, the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. My name's Lynn Julius, and I'm ably assisted by my technical assistant here, Lawrence. So we've been running these lectures since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, and they have attracted such a regular following that we're carrying on. The Harif, for those who don't know us, is the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, and we aim to raise awareness of the history and culture of these Jews. We've got a website, www.harif.org. In order to be informed of our Zoom login details for each event, you need to be subscribed to our website. We also have a sister website that keeps you up to date with the news, and that is Point of No Return. Just click on news on the Harif website. This session is being recorded, and the video will be uploaded very shortly, and you'll be able to access it on the Harif website. On our video channel, and we're also going out live on the Facebook page, Harif Facebook page. If you have any questions or comments, please do pop them in the chat, type them in the chat, and there'll be an opportunity to put them to our speaker once she has finished her presentation. So today was Yom HaShoah, which is the day designated by Israel to commemorate the Holocaust. And we thought it was fitting to actually focus on the impact of the Holocaust and of World War II on the Jews of North Africa, and specifically the Jews of Libya. Of course, the main focus of Yom HaShoah is always, understandably, on the Jews of Europe, but it's very important to say that the Jews of North Africa were very much impacted by World War II, and their plight deserves to be better known outside their own communities and their voices heard. So we are very fortunate tonight to have with us an expert on this subject, Vivienne Roumani-Denn, who I would like to welcome. She's joining us from New York. And Vivienne is a filmmaker, an oral historian, a writer, and she is also the past executive director of the American Sephardi Federation. And she has interviewed Jews from Libya and recorded their stories and uploaded their stories onto a website. And she's made 2 films, narrated by Isabella Rossellini and Meryl Streep, respectively. And she's working on a book based on the oral histories that she has collected. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Vivienne, who will tell us about Libyan Jews and the Holocaust. Thank you very much for joining us, Vivienne.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, all of you, near and far, for joining this. I also am really thankful to the people who opened up their homes and hearts to tell me some of their painful experiences. And I also thank you, Lynn and Lawrence and Harif, for bringing all these subjects to the forefront and to allow me to discuss the Libya Holocaust using the voices of those who experienced this. Now, some people already know, some of you, that Jews had been in Libya for millennia, and now they're no more. Let me change my view. Excuse me 1 second. So we need to start with a bit of context. Libya is the 4th largest country in Africa with extensive oil reserves. But as a country, it is a modern construct. And of course, today it's a country in chaos. We need to talk about Cyrenaica in the east, adjacent to Egypt, where Benghazi is the capital, and Tripolitania in the west, adjacent to Tunisia, where Tripoli is the capital. I was born in Benghazi. Tripoli and Benghazi are.
Vivienne, sorry, Vivienne, you're not sharing screen yet. We can't see that.
I thought it was there. Okay. I need to get out and do it again. Oh my goodness, this is what I was not expecting.
You want me to get it, the backup on my laptop?
Here, one moment. I'm sorry. Here we go. Okay, you haven't missed much.
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay. All right. So, all right. I was saying that Benghazi, Cyrenaica is near Egypt, Tripolitania is near Tunisia, and it's important to know that. And between Benghazi and Tripoli, they're 600 miles. They're separated by 600 miles and mostly desert. A third province in the southwest called Fezzan is not relevant to our discussion today. So we know that there was a Jewish presence in Cyrenaica as early as the 3rd century BCE. The Jews revolted against the Roman rules in Cyrenaica in 73 CE and 115 CE, both of which were crushed. And surviving Jews fled to the hinterland. You see, it's carved in stone, a menorah, showing the presence of the Jews there. Now, fast forward about 550 years, Libya was occupied by invading Arabs in the 7th century. And other than about a 40-year period in the early 1500s when Spain and the Knights of Malta controlled Tripolitania, and the Jews were subject to the Inquisition, both Cyrenaica and Tripolitania remained under the rule of various Muslim dynasties until the 20th century. Libya came under Muslim Ottoman rule in the 16th century, 1541, and my great-great-grandfather was in fact an official in the Ottoman government in Benghazi. This is Amos Romani. The picture is ours, but what's interesting is in the British Jewish Encyclopedia of 1909, under the heading Benghazi, you'll actually see a few names of the Libyan Jews who were there. Now, the last Ottoman census in the early 20th century showed more than 20,000 Jews in Libya, 2/3 in Tripoli. The communities had 69 rabbis, 21 synagogues, and 21 yeshivot. There was always interaction and trade with Italy. Italy occupied Libya in 1911. Now, Arab tribes in Cyrenaica resisted for 2 decades until the Italians brutally ended the revolt. The Jews played a very important commercial role under the Italians. Many spoke and corresponded both in Italian and Arabic, and life under Italian rule was calm, even during World War I. And Italian fascism was not initially seen as a threat, just a form of government. In fact, there were Jews in the fascist party. Now, a major change happened when Mussolini aligned himself with Hitler. And we see a little clip from my film. I'm sorry, the sound is not that good, but I hope the subtitles and knowing some of that history would help us.
أيوة ثمانية ماشي ما يفتكر وأمشي ونخلص أي ما بيرماني بيحمل الزهد الزهد.
In 1939, Il Duce signed a 10-year military alliance with Hitler.
Worried about Mussolini's alliance with Hitler. Soon, he brought Germany's racial laws to Italy and to Libya. Jews had to open their stores on the Sabbath. We could not go to public schools. Our papers were stamped Jew.
Now, the Italian racial laws were instituted in Libya despite efforts by the Italian governor, Italo Balbo. He tried to mitigate the impact because of the importance of the Jews to the economy. This is Joe Tamam from Benghazi. He says, in 1939, they forced the Jews to open their shops. They opened the shop and they left a boy or a girl from the family to say, the owner of the shop is not here. But things got tough later on, and the owners had no choice but to come to the store. So we have Ines Karadi from Benghazi also, who says, the Jews used to work on Sunday, but after the racial laws, they forced us to work on Saturday and not on Sunday. Once there was racism, the Italians didn't want to buy anything from us at any time. They didn't want them to go on a bus, to go into a movie theater, or to go anywhere for fun. No, she says, everything was prohibited. Life was peaceful until racism. We've got a Tripolitanian here, Chaim Baranes, who said, they took all the business people to Fum el Bab, a big square, the entrance of the Hara, which is the Jewish quarter in Tripoli. They put them out naked in their underwear, and they lashed them because they refused to open on Shabbat. They got an order from the governor, Italo Balbo, to open. Still they refused. They took them again, lashed them again. I remember, I was a small child in Corso Vittorio Emanuele. The store was open. The owner was in the back of the store. Two Italian guys walked in asking for something. He says this laughing. I don't have it. Whenever someone would ask for something, I don't have it. This was the situation as we moved to the actual fighting of World War II. The Second World War was mainly fought in the eastern Libyan desert and adjacent Western Egypt. Italian forces invaded British-controlled Egypt on September 13, 1940, initiating the African campaign of the Second World War. Men holding British passports were mostly Jews, were considered enemy aliens, and they were put in detention camps in Tripolitania and Cyrenaica. You see both places, Buerat al-Husn and Zwitina. Some ultimately managed to escape to Egypt, as we will see later, but the remainder were sent to camps in Europe, where they will be held for possible use in a prisoner exchange. Their experiences were quite different from the other Libyan Jews, and we'll digress here from the chronology to follow them. So Enrico Riel from Tripoli tells us his experience. When war broke out, the Italians put me in a concentration camp called Buerat al-Husn, about 300 kilometers from Tripoli. There was no hard work in the concentration camp. We did nothing, just read and walk around. Some tried to escape and they were beaten. No one was killed, just beaten. In January 1942, Enrico was sent to concentration camp in Italy near Parma called Monte Chiarugolo. He escaped from the Italian camp, and he said because he received help from farmers telling them that they were Italian soldiers who escaped. But this is what he tells us about the others. Many people were sent to camps in Germany, including Jacob Habib, from whom we'll hear very soon. They were sent to Bergen-Belsen. Our Aunt Dida told us that they entered the camp at 6 in the morning screaming, out. They would put them under cold showers, their teeth shattering. Aunt Dida's son was the head of the trash. He would bring them scraps of food he found, like potato peels, any leftovers from the German. Jacobi Habib was one of those sent to Bergen-Belsen. His description, whose testimony was sent to me by his family, and I thank them for that, is here. He was one of a group of prisoners who were sent by ship from Libya to Naples in 1942, and from there to Civitella del Tronto. He says they were relatively well treated in Civitella, except for 1 month of forced labor in Crocetta, working 12 hours per day digging anti-tank ditches under the supervision of soldiers of Wehrmacht. In May 1944, they were sent to Bergen-Belsen, and this is his description. On arriving in Bergen-Belsen, we were kicked and punched, even as we were getting down from the truck. Women and children had light work like peeling potatoes. At the office, they gave us yellow stars to put on our clothes. Roll call was around 4 a.m. They took us to chop wood or to download goods from trains from Auschwitz. I was also on the labor detail to transport the dead from the hospital to crematorium. The oven was running 24 hours a day. Other than the transport of the dead, we also had to move garbage. The SS kept some pigs in the camp, so we were called the Schweinkommando, the team of pigs. And at times we would secretly go to take some leftovers given to the pigs. The SS knew that, and every so often they'd stop us while working and make us open our mouths. And if they found any leftover vegetables or other stuff, they would punish us by keeping us standing under the guard booth without moving for 3 hours, not even able to turn our head while we were being slapped. Food in the morning was warm, dirty water called coffee. At noon, they gave us soup that had a little bit of carrot, some potato peel, and once in a while on Sunday, they would give us a little piece of lard that floated. Bread was distributed twice a week. It had to be cut into 1 centimeter slices per inmate per day. Once a week, they distributed a teaspoon of jam and about 50 grams of sugar, little rutabagas, and a little cheese that they said they extracted from potatoes. In the evening, we had a little soup with a small piece of bread. I did not witness any acts of violence, but beatings were a daily occurrence. The hospital there was run by prisoners, mostly Dutch, and it was periodically inspected by the SS. There were very few medicines. On November 20th, 1944, the Libyan Jews were sent to Biberach. Here is part of the German list of those transported. Jacobi Habib continues. They told us to prepare our things. They made us take off the yellow Magen David. They took us in comfortable buses to the train station. And from there, they took us to Biberach in an almost luxurious train with heat, accompanied by civic guards, not by SS. They distributed warm milk and clothing for the kids in every station. Everything changed from the time they gave us the news of the departure. No more beatings and no other maltreatment. Once we arrived at Biberach, a camp of about 1,500 people, we were received very well by the British and the American prisoners. We remained there under the protection of the International Red Cross. Let's jump to current times. In 2005, I was contacted in New York by Henry Joshua, who had been deported to Bergen-Belsen at age 10 with a group of Dutch Jews, seeking my help in finding a man named Zion Labi from Benghazi, whom their organization wished to honor. Mr. Joshua told me that those in Bergen-Belsen who saw the arrival of the Libyan Jews marveled how Mr. Labi taught the children the alphabet and had them march on the grounds singing Zionist songs right under the noses of the Nazi guards. Joshua said his activities with the Jewish children not only taught these children about their heritage, but also gave all the camp inmates a tremendous boost in their morale. Now, as Lynn said, this aspect of our Holocaust history, that the Jews of North Africa, in this case of Libya, were sent to German concentration camps, was relatively unknown until, fortunately, very recently, even in Israel. Consider this account from Yossi Sukari. Yossi said, when I was 9 years old, I grew up in a very Ashkenazi neighborhood in northern Tel Aviv. And on one of the memorial days of the Holocaust, the teacher talked about the Holocaust. And I said, my family was in the Holocaust as well. She told me, it's not true, that only the European Jews were in the Holocaust. So I went to the principal and I told him, that I knew from my mother and grandmother that they had been in the Holocaust. And he told me that the teacher was right. For 2.5 years, I thought that my mother and grandmother had lied to me. That was a very difficult experience. That's why I wrote the book, Benghazi, Bergen-Belsen. Now let's go back to the start of the war in 1940. Now remember, the fighting in the desert was between the British Army versus the Italians and the Germans. Tripoli in the west was in Italian and German hands until the last stages of the war in North Africa, and it was bombarded by the British. Benghazi, on the other hand, changed hands several times. The Benghazi airport, you see, was midway between Tripoli and Egypt, so it was crucial for resupplying whichever army was in control. It was therefore bombed by whoever was not in control, which means it was constantly bombed by one side or the other. In fact, those who could not stand the barrage of bombing nonstop. So many left the city, including my parents. When the British pushed the invading Italians back and they captured Benghazi on February 6, 1941, those with British passports who were being held in camps in Cyrenaica were freed. The Jews welcomed the British troops, including Jewish soldiers from Palestine. You see this shoulder, it's hard to see, but on his arm, there's a Jewish star. You see it right there. Mm-hmm. These are Jewish soldiers from Palestine in the British Army. Lil Arbib explains, we Jews gave the British a big celebration. We gave them food and drink. They subsequently had to pay for this welcome. The British then withdrew just 2 months later on April 2nd, following the arrival of Rommel's German African Corps in North Africa. Many Jews with British passports were no longer in internment camps in eastern Libya, Tripolitania, if you remember. So they fled with them. On April 3rd, 1941, with no government in place, Jewish homes and stores were ransacked in revenge. We hear from Felice Sasson Legzia. He says, all of the looting was done for revenge by the Italians against the Jews, because during the English occupation of Benghazi, the Jews dealt with the English. He says that was a normal thing, something that could not be avoided. You have your commerce, you have work, but in the eyes of the Italians, they saw the relationship as collaboration with the English. There were many, many harrowing individual stories, but I just want to read something from my mother's memoir. There was a curfew at night. We had Italian neighbors. One of them came to stay with us at my mother's house and brought us food since no one could go out. As soon as there was a little calm, Joseph, my father, wanted to go out to see what happened to his store and office. Soldiers captured him and pointed a gun at his chest. He told them that he was just going to the office, quick thinker, to get the Italian flag, to put it on the door to show support. They let him go. Meanwhile, the British got all the way to El Alamein, she said. Many people followed the British Army since they had British passports. We used to see German and Italian armed soldiers around the city. One night while we were with my mother and one of my sister-in-law, so 3 women alone, they knocked at the door. My mother hid us under blankets, telling us not to make a sound. She opened the door and she told them, "What do you want from me? I'm just an old lady here alone. There's nothing here for you." So they went away while we were trembling. There were several stories like this where there were some really difficult moments. Ines Karadi told the surprising story about an interaction with a German soldier. Now we go a little lighter. Once a German sergeant came to my future husband and asked him, "What race are you?" My husband became pale with fear. He told him, "What race?" He told him, "Don't be afraid. Are you Jewish? Don't worry, we're not Nazi. We're just the army. Don't be afraid. I want to ask you a favor. Take me to the synagogue, but don't tell anybody." He repeated with tears, "Take me to the synagogue." My husband asked him, "Why the synagogue? What do you want to do there?" He said, "Please don't ask questions. Do me a favor." He took him to the synagogue and he asked to have the Torah taken out. He read the Parsha of the week. It was the Haskara, the anniversary of the death of his mother. It seemed that he was a Jew who had figured out how to get into the German army. And there were a few like that. So now the British captured Benghazi again in December 41, but this time the Jews were more circumspect in dealing with them. The British then retreated again soon after, just about a month after, and many of the remaining British subjects in Cyrenaica left with them. That exodus to the east, to Egypt, was chaotic and included many harrowing stories, grabbing rights, being abused, but we don't have time to relate them all. So let's go to Jado instead, or the concentration camp in Libya. January 1942 was when Mussolini ordered that the British passport holders, whose story we have already heard, be sent to the camps in Italy. On February 7, 1942, just a month later, Mussolini ordered the removal of all remaining Jews from Cyrenaica, ostensibly because of their interaction with the British. There were 2 classifications: those indigenous Jews who had no foreign passports and those with French or French protectorate citizen. And their experience over much the same time frame were very different. Let's consider the indigenous Jews. Between May and October 42, about 2,600 indigenous Jews were sent in trucks to a former military camp in Jado, a village in the mountains 200 kilometers southwest of Tripoli. Now, lists of those to be transported were posted weekly in synagogues. Jado was run by Italians with a sadistic Italian chief marshal and Italian Arab guards. Conditions were very bad. More than 1 in 5 died of typhus. There's a commonality in the memoirs of those whom I interviewed, and I will read from a number to emphasize the conditions. Nahum Guetta says, "They made us suffer, both me and my future wife. We were 15. There was no food. The bread was full of bugs. There was typhus, and many died. There was a rabbi with us. They pulled him by his beard, dragged him to the floor to pick up crap, and they hit him on the back." Moshe Zrili tells us there were carabinieri, they were Italians and Arab, and they guarded us from outside the fence, which was electrified. One of them was a major with boots and a whip for horses. He would go into the camp, into the barracks. How was it divided? Well, every family took a 3 by 4 meter area inside and hung blankets. We had no beds. We slept on sera. Sera is like rattan mats. We slept like sardines. We had no blankets because we used them for walls. They wanted to kill us. We got sick. there was hunger. The Jews in Tripoli would send us fish and bread because there was not enough. Their situation was not that good either. The major would say, the shipment will not be allowed in today. This is how he would punish us. All we did was clean the camp, including the latrines. We had no strength. People were not moving except the young ones. The carabinieri just hit us. We did nothing all day. We had no strength. We all believed. We had emunah. We would pray and say Tehillim in hiding. We got the tifo pidocchioso, the lice typhus. 700 died from it. They would cover us. They were white. When the British came, they took the blankets because the lice lived in the blankets. I remember it well. I was 13. I had my bar mitzvah there. And Jora Roumani repeats somewhat the same story and says, I came there pregnant. My daughter was born there, and then she died there. Chaim Jewry tells us, I remember when they took all my family to Jado. It was a concentration camp surrounded by barbed wire. There was an Arab market. They came to Jado twice a week, and the Jews would sell anything they had to get some food. There was a terrifying incident in Jado that occurred close to the time of liberation. And the way Moshe really described it was how they were taken to a square in the center of the camp where there was a truck with 4 machine guns. He described it like in the movies. Then he said there was an order from Italy not to kill us. Chaim Jewry says, one day I remember that day very well. He continues, I was 14 or 15. They gathered us, all the men together, and they had to come to the middle of the camp. I remember that day, the children, the women were crying. My mom hid me. I snuck out to see. I was curious, and I saw all the police, the captain, both Arabs and Italian. I saw them and I ran away. I fell and I hurt myself very much. I became infected. Subsequently, he had to have his leg amputated. And Jora Roumani says, one day they came to take us to this big place. They put us in a circle and they brought that thing like a machine gun that goes around and that they put in the middle to kill us. They prepared us for slaughter. After 15 minutes, a call came from Italy. He said, make them suffer, but don't kill them. The Maréchal released us and took the elders, the rabbis, the chachamim, and told them to sweep the floor with their beards. And that's what they did on their stomach on the floor. This is a sculpture of that description outside the Albertina Museum in Vienna. The end of the war in North Africa was approaching. The British drove the Germans and Italian armies back across the Libyan desert starting on October 42, and they captured Tripoli in January 43. Moshe Zwili says, when the British came, we could not leave the camp. They kept us there, cleaned us and our clothes. They stripped us naked. The English did. The doctors had masks. We had the illness, the typhus, and they were afraid that it was contagious. The American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee sent food in cars with Magen Davids. We ate and got stronger and went back to Benghazi. Now we turn back to those Cyrenaican Jews holding French and Tunisian nationalities. They were transported by truck not to Jado, but to Vichy-controlled French North Africa. My parents, who had Tunisian passports, were sent to Tunisia. Allied forces were approaching from the west, and Tunisia was where the final battle of the war in North Africa would be fought. My mom says, we were shocked when the bombing started because Tunisia was not ready for war. There were no shelters. And we thought it was safe because the Bey lived there. That's the monarch. But fear began. The Germans knocked at doors to take young men to forced labors. They were looking for Joseph's brothers, who were saved by Arab neighbors who were very kind to us. They hid them at their house for hours and hours. And this is my aunt describing the situation. All of a sudden, on the 30th of March, 1943, they came to bomb La Marsa. That's the place where they were in Tunisia. There was shrapnel that fell like pieces of glass. About 40 of us from Benghazi were killed, small, young, old. My two brothers, my sister and her fiance, arm in arm, as if they were taking a walk, were killed, and my mother. And a brother lost his arm. 13 members of my father's immediate family died instantly from that attack. The Jews of Tripoli fared better than those of Cyrenaica throughout the war because they were not sent to concentration camp like Jado, but about 3,000 Jewish men in Tripolitania, ages 18 to 45, were sent in 1942 to labor camps in the desert to work on roads and railroads. The camps were at Sidi Azaz, you see it, east of Tripoli, and Bukbuk, far away in western Egypt near the Libyan border. For those who remained, life in the city during the war, with its hostile Italian residents and the presence of the German army, was very tense. Now, Britain governed Cyrenaica and Tripolitania following the Allied victory in North Africa in 1943, and the Jews were able to return home, or to what was left after the wartime devastation. Moshe Zwili said, we returned from Jado and found Benghazi in ruins. No water, no electricity. In a home that had 4 or 5 rooms, maybe there was one room that was okay. There was a Jewish army there, Israeli, the brigade. It was written on their arm, Palestina. They helped us. They took us to Talmud Torah. They went to fight in Italy, but first they came to Benghazi. They built a camp in Benghazi and raised an Israeli flag. They had problems with the Arabs who wanted to take it down. They started at Talmud Torah for us. They would go to synagogue, to the Talmud Torah, and they would teach us Hebrew. Many girls married them. Now, the Italians and German soldiers were gone, and the British were in control. In my research, this is the point where I thought of the Shakespearean line, a plague on both your houses. It was a plague on all your houses, because the Jews kept hoping with every nation that things would get better. And we'll move to 1945 pogrom, and you'll see what I mean. The fighting in North Africa was over, but the suffering of the Jews of Libya was not. Starting in Tripoli on Sunday evening, November 4th in 1945, and continuing for 3 days, there was a violent pogrom against Jews in Tripolitania. At least 130 Jews were brutally killed. Women were raped, and Jewish homes, stores, and synagogues were ransacked and burned. In Kusabat, Jews were forced to convert to avoid being killed. Every Jew I interviewed believed that the British had given the Arab mobs permission to riot. What is evident from official documents is that the British were at least grossly negligent in failing to anticipate the pogrom and in failing to provide protection to the Jewish community for 3 days. And this is a people that my father actually admired for their punctuality. I went to interview Lisa Sassi from Amros. She greeted me at the door in Abu Tor with tears. I have waited more than 50 years for you. She was finally ready to talk about the pogrom. The details that she and other people related about the riots and killing in Tripoli, Amros, Kusabat, and Zanzur are shocking. But I want to read some of what she experienced in Amros. And kept it inside herself for all that time. She says, at night we heard screaming from every house, screaming, screaming, everyone screaming. They came to our house, the house of my aunt, and they started breaking in. My brother was on the roof pouring hot oil on the Arabs, so they took a bomb and threw it at him. His skin came all burned. When morning came, we went out. We saw a little boy. She was crying. In front of his mom, they had gouged out his eyes. Then they killed his mother. They raped her. They rolled her in a straw carpet, she and her mother. They poured gas on her and burned her. They went to another house, the house of my sister's mother-in-law, and they put, I can't, I'm sorry, I can't say that. With what they did. You saw little children dead, a woman dead with her baby at her breast. Dead. I never told my children. I never wanted to tell them anything that would hurt their hearts. But it is not good, she says. It is important to tell. This has stayed in my heart until today, how they made us suffer. They burned people and gouged their eyes. A similar story was told by Avigdor Dror about a rape and burning in Zanzibar of 30 members of the 120-member Jewish community of Zanzibar were killed. And Chaim Baranes says, they saw that they destroyed the businesses. They saw they were killing the people, but the English army didn't put soldiers to protect the Jewish people. Those days, they had Palestinian Jewish soldiers in the army, but they did not allow them to leave the base. Then Chaim tells the story of a very close Arab family of 20 kids. And he says, my mother used to go to their house. They would come and eat in our house. We were very close friends. When the Ma'ararot, when the pogroms came in 45, those were the first people to attack us. I didn't see anyone to help us, maybe some Italians. In contrast, Jacob Sassoon, who lives in Rome, said, we lived in a building not far from the Hara. There were people who were not Jewish who had their stores at the ground level who did protect us. They stopped the Muslims, Arabs from attacking our family. Nevertheless, he says, my mom was killed, she and her 2 sons. So after this, the Jews of Tripoli prepared for self-defense. They had help from the Irgun and from members of the Palestinian Brigade, the Jewish soldiers from Palestine who had fought for the British. Here's one description. Chaim Baranes says how he was stopped by somebody and he was asked, do you want to join the Irgun? He said, yes. So a few days went by and he was blindfolded and they drove him around and they brought him to a light and he never knew who approached him till the day he talked to me. And he said, they asked me, do you want to join this organization? I said, yes. You risk your life? I said, yes. You're ready to defend your people? I said, yes. He then described how he stole weapons from the British without getting caught. A lot of near misses, but he didn't get caught. And he told me the reason they did not want him to know much is because they told him, if they catch you, you can't name anybody, even if they cut you to pieces. So he continues, during the pogrom in 48 on Shavuot, they attacked Jewish people. He wanted to tell the story because there's one 14-year-old girl who actually helped in the defense. She threw a grenade at a Jeep, which was very helpful at the time in that situation. They took her quickly to Palestine to make her disappear so nobody could ever catch her. Then the preparation with the Jewish soldiers was indeed very helpful. And only 18 Jews were killed in 1948 pogrom. The defenders killed 92 attacking Arabs. At that point, trust was forever broken. There were about 38,000 Jews in Libya after World War II. Most of them, 90% of them, made Aliyah between 49 and 51. And those who remained behind, Libya became independent in 51, and restrictions on Jewish life were imposed, including any contact with Israel. Jewish schools were closed, and we all went to Italian Catholic schools. Jews required to have an Arab partner who owned 51% of the business. although most of them were actually never involved in the day-to-day operations. Jews were discriminated against in hiring, and I actually vividly recall, as a child with my brothers, my mother sent us huddled in the furthest room of the apartment, turned off all the lights, and told us not to make a sound while we heard mobs in the street shouting, "Death to the Jews." That was during the 56 Sinai War. I didn't know that until recently. So there were major riots in both Benghazi and Tripoli during the Six-Day War in '67. Most of the remaining Jews were first sent to camps for their protection, and then they were told that the authorities could no longer protect them. So they were evacuated with the assistance of the Italian government. They were permitted to take only one suitcase and a small amount of money. A couple of whole entire families were murdered on the way to the airport. This was essentially the end of Jewish life in Libya. Today, there are no Jews in Libya. Libyan Jewish culture continues in the community of Rome and in Israel, where Lynn mentioned there are a couple of museums. And there's also some synagogues with Libyan liturgy. The experience of the Jews of Libya, for me, is an example of what happens when hate is first allowed to fester and then to grow. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Vivienne. That was an absolutely fascinating overview of what happened, and thank you for bringing in all the personal stories. Gosh, please do write your questions in the chat if you have any for Vivienne. Meanwhile, I'd like to start with a couple of questions of my own. Were there any deaths at Bergen-Belsen? I mean, were any Libyan Jews, did any Libyan Jews actually die there?
No, there were, I mean, they all came back.
Mm-hmm. Right,
They
unlike...
were in terrible shape, obviously, but yeah.
And the 1945 pogrom, that terrible pogrom that broke out, what were the causes, would you say? I mean, was it anti-Zionism? Was it Nazi propaganda? Because we know that, for instance, the Mufti was broadcasting on Radio Berlin throughout the war. I mean, what would you say actually caused this pogrom?
That's a very interesting question, because, I mean, you can ask that question almost any period of time where there's anti-Semitism to that extent, but they just felt their weakness. They felt they could actually get rid of them. They felt now, one of the interviews said they were not really Libyans. There were others who came from other places, but I can't confirm that. It's hatred, and who knows? Who knows? You know, we know from social media that the influence is great. Once you start one line of thought, it gets picked up, unfortunately, pretty quickly by many. So that's another. I cannot fully say what it is. Right.
Yeah, and there's a question here: were there any Libyans who were amongst the righteous, who were honored as righteous amongst the Gentiles, I think it is?
I don't know if there are officially, but I happen to know of a couple who actually did, many actually, who tried to help the Jews and save the Jews. Let me put it another way. Unfortunately, there is a case of one who specifically did not help. to protect himself and his family.
Right. Yeah, I know
Right.
it would have been very embarrassing for some of those Jews, for some of those Arabs who did protect Jews to actually admit it. Obviously, when Israel was, the Arabs were the enemies of the Jews.
Well,
So,
it's very interesting because it really depends, and that's what I saw throughout the interviews, including my own families, my father's. There's some who really helped, and there's some who did just the opposite. And growing up as a small child, any of us, this is really a very difficult situation, because when you do not know whom to trust, that one person could be your best friend one day and the next day kill you, or one person who was your friend and remained a friend, you just never know. It very unstabling not to know.
yeah, as you say, the trust was broken by that terrible pogrom, and that family of 20 children who used to come and have meals with you and everything, and they just turned against you. Yes.
And I tell you, there is one example of what Lisa said. I couldn't even transcribe it. I had to actually leave it, an incident, and just walk around. And when I prepared this, I wrote it, and I just can't say it.
Absolutely. It's still
It was
so raw.
horrendous.
Yeah. Interesting question from Raphael. Were any Libyan Jews involved in the Arab resistance to Italian rule?
That is a very interesting question. I personally have not interviewed anybody who said they actually did it, but my own mother's manuscript sounded like she was really sympathetic to the way they were horribly treated by the Italians when they revolted. And I put that in the film, actually, just a line that she said that was in her manuscript. And I think that's why the way I finessed it is by saying they were brutally killed by the Italians.
And yet the Italians seem to be a lot kinder to the Jews, if you could say it that way, insofar as they didn't want to kill the Jews in Jado.
Well, who knows why, who knows? They got an order. They were about to kill them.
Yeah.
But now, a lot of interviews, they said the king of Italy, il re d'Italia. Now, I can't imagine that the king of Italy actually called and said, don't kill them, just make them suffer. It was probably some, his office who said that. But yeah, as I say, Lynn, at one point in my, while I was doing research for the film many years ago, I was actually also hoping, like them, for any country, any peoples, to make things better. Even though I know the general history, but I thought, okay, there'll be a little light. And really, at one point, I just threw up my hands and I said, curses, to all of you. I mean, you really have to go individual by individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually answers Yolande's question. She's asking if there was any help from the other European countries. And the answer is no.
Well, at the end, I must say, Italy provided the plane in '67.
Yes.
Italy provided the planes and the airlifted them. And I mean, they would have been killed, I think, if they didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And to answer Yolande's other question, which is, were the Jews in Libya Sephardim? Can you explain the composition of the community?
We had some really, what they call tahor, the Sephardim from Turkey. We had some, we have we had from everywhere, really. We had from Greece, we had from other places. It's interesting because my father once told me that we were Sfardim. And you know, when you're a kid, you listen to yeah. So when I actually applied for my Spanish citizenship, you know, you have to provide non-Google research. And they were convinced that we were actually Sfardim. So, and you could see why, when you think of the history of the travels of the Jews from, let's say, from Spain, even from Titus, you could sort of follow it. But from Spain, you see how they get to the Ottoman period, and from the Ottoman period, and a couple of stories were the good old shipwreck stories, you know. Oh, they were on their way to Israel, or at the time Palestine, and they got shipwrecked in Libya, and they saw the beautiful girls and fell in love with them, and they remained. I'm sure that happens sometimes.
And they took no notice of the Barbary pirates there, I suppose. And
Oh, that's another story. That's another story.
Okay, I just checked to see if there are any other questions. Last chance, peoples. Just to mention that we did visit the Museum of Libyan Jewry in Or Yehuda, which is about 15 minutes away from Tel Aviv in Israel. And that is absolutely fascinating. If any of you ever get a chance to go there, it's not very well known. And I think it started life as a nursery, and it was converted into a museum. So it's in a residential street, but it's absolutely fascinating, and it takes you through the whole history. There are photos, there are artifacts, there's even a reconstruction of a market, and I really do recommend you go and see it.
And I'd go on to say, if you're not Libyan, they really spoil you. They're astounded that you've attended. And I think they're actually astounded if anyone attends. They were surprised anyone walked in there, and they put display special stories on. It was a very nice experience.
Yes, yes. So if I'm not mistaken, I don't think there are any more questions, are there?
If anyone wants to actually ask a physical question, do you want to raise your hand? And at this time, I'm afraid I'm going to have to I will have to exclude. We have someone raise their hand.
Yeah.
Ruby.
Yeah, that's
okay, Joe.
Joe,
do you want to unmute yourself? Can you mute yourself, Joe?
I am unmuted now or not?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. No, wait a minute. You're muted again. Sorry.
You need to unmute yourself. It's Ruby, isn't it? No, I've got to get to unmute you.
There, yeah.
Please unmute yourself.
Now
Yes.
okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you so much, Vivienne, on this dramatic details. I was not aware of how many times Benghazi traded. I was aware that they came in up to El Alamein in June of 41, and then Montgomery attacked Rommel and continued. And the personal deal was very dramatic. I appreciate that very much. I want to thank Lynn for bringing you this program. So I have a question. One, do you know Gina, the CEO, the president of Jimena in San Francisco?
Yes, I've known her for many years. In fact, I interviewed her mom.
That's wonderful. She has a tremendous story, and she told when she was leaving, allow her to leave the airport, they wanted to burn the car to kill her or something after 67 war. So I think it's also a very, very dramatic story.
We actually had her on Harif on about 2 years ago. I think she did a session for us, and you can actually catch up with the recording.
Yeah, it's really exemplary of how Ines Karadi says a very similar story, how it affects the individual. And that's why I'm so attracted to oral histories, because you don't get what really happens to you as a person. And each person, it affects a whole civilization, the pain of each person. And what she described, where every step of the way, Gina Boublil thought she was being saved, and then there was another obstacle. Many of them recount that. Ines Karadi especially, they try to, they get in a car, and then there's a truck that left one of them behind because, sorry, there's no room. Or she was a 14-year-old who looked like an 18-year-old. So, and she says, the soldiers have not had women for a long time. And, there's just so many very, very painful stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like you think about the Holocaust from Eastern Europe as well.
Yes. Vivienne, I was born in Iraq, and I was 10 years old when the Farhud happened in 1941. And I moved to Israel, then Canada. Now I reside in Los Angeles for the last 45 years. I completed my memoir in English, Beyond the Rivers of Babylon, and now being finally translated to Arabic, because I feel the obligation to tell our story in the Arab world. And finally, somebody made a script of my story, and it's the last development. And I understand you are a filmmaker. So either I contact you, you contact through Lynn.
Yes,
So
sure.
With pleasure. I know your book. I haven't read it, unfortunately, but I know your book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So very important to get the story out there, Joe. Yeah. I just wanted to ask you, Vivienne, why is it, do you think, that the Farhud is perhaps better known than the 1948 Libyan pogrom? Sorry, 1945 Libyan pogrom.
There are many reasons, but I wish to answer it this way, if you don't mind. And that is, when I talk to Libyan Jews, many of them said to me, Libya, forget about it. I don't want to know about Libya. I just want to move on, let it go, and I think they're very strong people. You could see there were only 38,000, but very strong, and their voices are really being heard now. But I have a brother who says, I wasn't born in Libya. He came to the US when he was 14. It's not wrong.
Yeah.
I think we thought one thing, just like all of us, that we were really friends and all that. And then, as I say, one after the other. And the old generation Arabs were really, it was, and sometimes they lived uneasily, but there was a lot of respect. They really did believe, that there were people of the book, which reminds me, my father once, he was a businessman in the shuk there, and his office was the shuk, and he had a lot of very good friends who were Arabs, and they liked each other a lot. And they trusted him. In fact, sometimes they would even call him in to resolve disputes between two Arabs, because they knew he would be yashar, straight. And one of them said to him once, you know why we feel that way? I don't know if he was talking about himself or generally. He said, we don't believe you're the real people. You just came into the civilization and said you were the people's descendants from Abraham. Otherwise, we would love you.
Oh my goodness.
Lynn, to answer your question, the Farhud really was not well known.
No.
Finally, the Israeli government in 2014 made it as part of the Nazis. It's a Nazi, instigated. So now it's more known now. But
right, yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. It is much better known than it was. Yeah. I just have a last question, really, I think, before we wrap up. Vivienne, you've been very involved in raising awareness of the forgotten refugees. You were in the film, The Forgotten Refugees. What is your assessment? I mean, how much progress have we made, or how little progress have we made to get this issue out there?
I think we've made tremendous progress. I received several little clips today from the chat groups I'm in, and there were some really good ones from Libyan Jews from Israel, and also I think from Italy, if I'm not mistaken. So, but it's not enough. It's never enough. However, I also believe in exposing who we are, all of us Jews from any country, from any background. There was a really good article in The Atlantic about, do we really need to teach just the Holocaust? Of course not. That's very important. But it's also important to know who we are as people. What do we believe in? And she ended up saying the writer was not even Jewish, and she wrote a book on it. She said, you know, let's show them a Shabbat table. Let's show them how we get together. Let's show them how we act with the Tikkun Olam. What do we really do for it? And, you know, who are we as a people, not only as victims?
I think I can't think of a nicer way to end this session. Thank you so much, Vivienne. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank Thanks so much for joining us.
And if anybody has a question, Lynn, please pass it on to me.
I will. I will indeed. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so if anybody wants to unmute themselves and say goodbye.
I can't do that. Well, I've got to take some people out the meeting who are put iPhone or iPad.
Can we just have the advertisements?
And let me just remove the people from the meeting. There are a couple I have to remove because we don't know who they are.
Okay.
Sorry, if you don't let us know who you are, you're just iPhone or Samsung.
So let me just tell you about the next meeting we have, which is on the 9th of May. And it's going to be something that coincides with Lag BaOmer. As you know, it'll be Lag BaOmer that day. And we will hear about the story of the Abo family who came from Algeria and made a huge contribution to Palestine as it was then, Eretz Israel, and have an intimate connection with Lag BaOmer. So find out what it's all about next May the 9th. I hope to see you all then. Rabbi Lavi has just entered the waiting room.
A little bit on the late side.
I would like to ask something, especially to Ruby.
Everyone's unmuted now, so everyone can speak. I've taken out iPads and iPhones out the meeting, so anyone can speak now.
Okay, Ruby said he wrote a book. I want to know, Ruby, did you send a copy of your book to the National Library of Israel? Because I collect here in Lima, Peru, books from those Jewish people who wrote something about their stories, and I take it to the National Library in Jerusalem. It's very important to have your book and every book written by a Jew about history, or not only Jews, but about Jewish history.
Is that Anat talking, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anat.
Yeah. My book is at the Babylonian Heritage Center, and it could be found on Amazon, called Beyond the Rivers of Babylon. Beyond the Rivers of Babylon and the Joseph Samuels. And I'll be delighted if you send me your address or something to send you a copy or whatever to make it easier for the, you know.
Well, I think you've done very well, Joe, getting your book into the Babylonian Heritage Museum, because they didn't accept mine.
They put it in the library, not in the bookshop.
Yeah, not in the bookshop. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
here are the future
Okay.
events.
But wait,
All right.
till
Yeah.
it becomes in Arabic. That's
Yeah.
my dream, that when it's
Yes.
finished in Arabic, to publish it in the Arab world.
Very important to get it into Arabic, Joe.
You have my email in the chat.
Okay, that's
Mr.
great.
Ruby. Mr. Samuels, you have my email in the chat.
Okay,
Thank
I'll
you
take a
very
look. I'll
much.
take a look at it.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
everybody.
and got all the
I think-
future events, including a live event, an in-person event coming up soon, which is a film at JW3 on, what date is that, Lynn?
The 24th of May. Yeah. Okay, I think we'll leave it there now. And once again, thank you so much to Vivienne for a wonderful talk. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you again very soon.
This film is very,
Lynn,
very
I
fun.
didn't get her. Lynn, I didn't get her email. Could you just send it to me or text
Yeah,
it?
I
whatever
will
you-
send it to you. Okay.
Thank you. And
No
really
problem.
appreciate your efforts together, that you are bringing all the speakers and to make us aware. I've learned a lot today.
So have we all. Thank you, Joe, and I'll make sure that you get Anat's email.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Fascinating evening.
Thank you.
Very interesting. Tadaba.
Bivakasha.
Good night, everyone. Bye.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Night, night.